I'm Alice McKenzie, and welcome to Must Read. Today, our guest is Dr. Sunggu Yang, Assistant Professor of Christian Ministries at the College of Christian Studies at George Fox University in Newberg, Oregon. An ordained Presbyterian minister, Dr. Yang is the author of several books and articles that reflect the wide range of his research interests, from preaching in Asian American context to holistic preaching, to the preaching of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which is the topic of his latest book that we'll talk about today. And you can visit our Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence website to find out more about Dr. Yang's work and bio. So this latest book is entitled The King's Speech, Preaching Reconciliation in a World of Violence and Chasm, which is published in 2019 by Cascade Books. So welcome, Dr. Yang. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me today. This is my great pleasure. I love your program and all the talks, so thank you. This is my real pleasure. Yeah.
Giving us some time. So a good question to start, I guess, would be what motivated you to write this book?
Yeah, I think I can give three very quick answers for that. Above all, I admire Dr. King. I mean, his legacy, his theology of reconciliation, and his wonderful preaching practice. So it's been quite many years. So I wanted to write something about that experience. And more importantly, the second reason is, well, as we know, there are many publications already about Dr. King in the market, approaching Dr. King from various perspectives, like sociological, political, and ethical, and theological. But there are just few that approaches Dr. King as a Christian preacher, just focusing his own preaching or sermons. So that was my real focus writing this book. As we know that Dr. King often himself said that in the quiet recesses of my heart, he said, I'm a clergyman, a Baptist preacher. And I believe that is the personality he brought out to the streets or for his social activism. So making the connection, his Christian identity, preaching, and social activism, especially around the theme of reconciliation. That was my motive writing this book. And I believe his message, his inspiration, still we need for this broken world. Yeah, that's why I want to write this book.
So the title of the book contains the theme of the book, which is reconciliation. Why was reconciliation so key to Dr. King's homiletical theology?
Well, I believe that was one of the very core theological motives or his social activism, reconciliation itself. And as we know, his reconciliation was kind of universal, right? He wanted to create unity and harmony. Now, this becomes controversial for some folks because he was creating unity and reconciliation between the oppressed and the oppressors. And he even called the oppressors victimized oppressors. And that was mind-blowing for some folks because as a preparation for this talk, I watched the movie Selma again, how things really went around that time. Folks were being somehow murdered and killed as well by the various sectors of the society. And then Dr. King's message was, we need to love our oppressors and enemies. What we really need is not revenge, not real anger, but the reconciliation between all the parties involved. I believe that was at the very core of his activism and his message. So it was very natural for me to focus on his theology and practice of reconciliation.
And in a book that focuses on his preaching, I appreciated that you identified him as a prophet, yes, but more as a prophetic mediator.
Yes, yeah.
I thought that was a very helpful way to look at him. So when you think about his notion of reconciliation, it really was central to his depiction of God and Jesus, who we are. Could you say a brief word about a couple adjectives about who's God, who's Jesus, who are we?
Sure, yes. Well, that may take some hours, but I can do it in 2 minutes. So God, as I can interpret King's sermons and his theology, I believe there are 3 adjectives for describing God in King's mind. They are universal and personal and historical. God is universal God. God is universal law and truth. At the same time, King is bringing the universal God to the personal level. That God really cares about me, cares about us. Even Dr. King was praying a lot, as we know, when he was in some troubles and agony. He prayed, listening or hearing God's guidance. But at the same time, this God is historical as well. So when this God sees some oppression or some inhumanism going on in this world, God will intervene and God will help us transform this broken world. So that was very well-rounded conception of God, I believe, in King's mind. God's universal, personal, and historical. And when it comes to Jesus, well, he's a Baptist preacher, so he believes Jesus as a personal or the savior, right? Just savior for this broken or sinful world. But at the same time, Jesus is the best example of the nonviolent, direct social activism or resistance in the world. So he's a great example we can look up to as a savior and great example. And he needed, or he emphasized reconciliation between among all peoples involved, like oppressors or some indifferent people or the oppressors as well, because he believed we human beings are equally created in the image of God, the Imago Dei. In his own word, we have the indelible stamp of the Creator, every single person. So we gotta love each other, and Jesus showed that really good example to follow. Yeah.
Great, you did it in 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
So then I also appreciated the treatment of eschatology, that it's now. The promised land,
Yep.
is now. The promised land is the beloved community. And as you get near the end of the book, when you talk about how because God is universal as well as personal, that evil is doomed, which is a very powerful message.
Yeah, indeed.
So what could you just offer 1 or 2 lessons for us preachers in these very difficult times, which, as you point out in the book, have similarities to his troubled times? Yeah,
indeed. Thanks for the question. Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that the message itself from Dr. King, which was love your enemies. Of course, he said he borrowed that message from Jesus. Right. But that message itself was really hard for his own audience as well. Right. That love your enemies. But he said that there's a redemptive power in love, and we can somehow love and redeem and transform our enemies and oppressors as well. I think that's a hard pill still to swallow in our current political and sociological circumstances. But that's the message we really need to hear at this point. We need to break down all the barriers. I mean, sometimes as Christians, even myself as well, we tend to think I'm right, they're wrong. And how can I love when they are so wrong, right? I need to correct them first, I believe. That's what happens. So yeah, that's the message we still need in this world. Yeah, let's just break down all the barriers and just give or love each other.
No, reconciliation gets.
Yes, yeah.
Reconciliation, we believe, will have the last word. So thank you so much for this book that examines the preaching of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and offers it in a very compelling way, a word that we need today. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.